Did the music really die on February 3rd, 1959? Well, Don McLean would tell you it did.
The music died.
But I'm not so sure. So what really happened that day, and more importantly, what happened in the aftermath? By the way, this video is a request from Michael. If you want to request a video yourself, check out the link in the description below. Now, the 50s was a great time for rock and roll. This was the decade where the teenager was born, because in post-war America, middle-class parents were doing well enough that their kids didn't have to work and could even have a little bit of pocket money. And what were they doing with this spare time and spare cash? Well, they were going to dance halls. And it wasn't ballroom dancing like their grandparents back in the day. No, this was rock and roll, a fast, fun genre of music that was the sort of love child of jazz and blues. Guitars were a key feature, and boys and girls were swept up in the hype of the rock stars of the era. And three big names that emerged in this time were Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens and J.P. Richardson, also known as the Big Bopper. Their music, while tame by today's standards, shocked the older generations who felt the lyrics were too sexual and that the dancing wasn't very becoming of young people. But their impact on the world of rock and roll was cut tragically short. On the 3rd of February 1959, the three musicians and their pilot were travelling together to their next gig. Sadly, their plane crashed near Clear Lake, Iowa, killing everyone on board. The pilot, 21-year-old Roger Peterson, was an experienced pilot despite his age. However, he'd not been made aware of a weather warning on their flight course, and not long into the flight, they encountered problems that eventually caused them to crash. It was Jerry Dwyer, the owner of the air service company, who discovered the wreckage. He claimed he had seen the lights of the plane dip not long after it took off, but he assumed it was an optical illusion. It was only when it was confirmed the plane hadn't made it to the other side that he went out to look for it. And the press soon got news of the tragedy, breaking it on national TV before loved ones had even been told.
Historian from Clear Lake, Iowa, three of the nation's top rock and roll singing stars, Ritchie Valens, J.P. the Big Bopper Richardson, and Buddy Holly, died today with their pilot in the crash of a chartered plane.
Other musicians due to play that night had travelled by bus rather than plane. Tommy Allsup, for example, narrowly missed out on a plane seat after losing a coin toss to Ritchie Valens. We flipped the coin backstage. I had put my bag in the station wagon to go to the airport. I went back into the club to see if the instruments were loaded on the bus. Ritchie was signing autographs, and that's when we flipped the coin. I flipped it, Valens called heads, he got his stuff off the bus. Occasionally when I get on a plane I think about it, but I have no fear of flying. If it's your time to go, you're going to go. When Tommy arrived at the hotel, he went to the desk to find out in which rooms Holly, Valens and Richardson were staying. When he returned to the bus, it was him who had to let the others know about the tragedy. Buddy Holly's wife, Maria Eleanor Holly, was pregnant at the time. Now, she got a phone call from a friend of Buddy Holly's telling her not to turn on the news and to wait until he got there. Naturally, she immediately turned on the news, only to find out about Buddy's death. And sadly, she suffered a miscarriage from the grief of losing her husband. The crash caused shockwaves across the country. Three key figures of the fun and exciting youth culture just gone. Huge thanks to DistroKid for sponsoring this video. If you're an independent artist, this is for you. DistroKid is the easiest way to distribute your music to all the major streaming platforms, including Spotify, Apple Music, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. You get unlimited music uploads for a low yearly price, and you keep 100% of your royalties. DistroKid doesn't take any commission. That is an awesome thing for artists. This company really wants to put artists first, as it absolutely should be, and that's why I'm so proud to be working with them. I just wish there was more of that in the music industry. It's super fast to upload too. Your music goes live on streaming services quicker than any other distributor. It's already trusted by millions of artists worldwide as well. Sign up to DistroKid using my link in the video description and start sharing your music with the world today. But why is this day known as the day the music died? Well, the phrase itself comes from Don McLean's 1971 hit American Pie, an ode to those killed in the crash, as well as a look back into that era. Buddy Holly was McLean's idol as a teenager, and his death impacted him profoundly. It inspired him to write the song. And the song starts with the line,
A long, long time ago, I can still remember how that music used to make me smile.
Of course, he's referring here to his own experience growing up in the 50s when rock and roll was thriving. By the way, I should say I can only play tiny amounts of music in these videos because of YouTube's copyright robots, but I upload special versions of these videos to my Patreon page with much more of the music in them. If you fancy it, it's patreon.com/musicmongoose. Now, McLean goes on to directly reference the plane crash.
But February made me shiver with every paper I deliver.
Before finishing the intro with Something Touched Me Deep Inside the Day the Music Died. So the song is as personal as it is a tribute. Yes, it's a comment on how the rock and roll music of that era seemed to die with Holly, Valens and Richardson, but it's also a nostalgic look back at being a teenager during that time. However, it goes beyond even that. In interviews, McLean has always been coy about pinning down the exact meaning of the song. Many view parts of it through a political lens, a commentary on how the 60s saw the downfall of the American dream. McLean put it bluntly in an interview with The Guardian once. Carly Simon's still being coy about who You're So Vain was written about, so who cares? Who gives a f***? I think McLean has always liked the mystery behind the song. And although the song is pretty morbid, however you interpret it, that wasn't always the plan. Because originally, the song finished with a slightly more optimistic verse, talking about the future and hope. But McLean decided to scrap that. Things weren't going that way. I didn't see America improving intellectually or politically. It was going steadily downhill, and so was the music. So as you'd expect from an 8-minute epic like American Pie, there are lots of ways to interpret The Day the Music Died, be it literal or political. But if we are to take it literally, is it true that the rock and roll music of the 1950s died on February 3rd, 1959? Well, yes and no. Obviously, there were other rock and roll musicians who weren't on that plane that day who carried on playing, and in that sense, the music of course lived on. However, there's no denying that the end of the 50s signalled a change in music, and a change in life in general. The 60s brought liberation movements, political assassinations, hippie culture, and a seismic shift in how things were done. Popular music evolved, losing some of the features of the rock and roll era of the 50s. But if you look deeper, it was still very much there. Some of the biggest bands of the 60s took inspiration from the likes of Holly, Valens and Richardson. I mean, take Paul McCartney, a member of arguably the biggest band of all time. John and I started to write because of Buddy Holly. It was like, wow, he writes and is a musician. And this inspiration was particularly evident in their earlier stuff, but like all good things, they evolved over time, found their own voice. So maybe the music never did die, maybe it just changed to keep up with the times. But the seeds were well and truly sown. It's hard to find any band whose success in the 60s wasn't inspired by the rock and roll of the 50s. Maybe rock and roll living on wasn't about the people, but about the idea. The king himself, Elvis Presley, once spoke about how rock and roll would continue to live on. It's sure going to take something mighty good to replace it. Maybe I won't be around forever, but rock and roll is here to stay for a while. And I think that sums it up perfectly, because yes, individual people are of course a huge part of music revolutions, but it's the idea that continues to live on as long as people are engaging with it. Rock and roll is still alive, despite that fateful day in 1959. And it wouldn't be the last tragic plane crash that changed rock and roll forever. Leonard Skinner faced a similar tragedy, and their song Freebird became a sort of memorial to that. There's a fascinating story behind that song actually, you can watch it over here.